All right, Shalom. First and foremost, before I begin this lesson, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushai, Bahashem Rechah Kudash. The honors go out to the apostles, elders, great millstone, who rule and teach well. Shalom, wa barakim to you brothers and sisters out there. All right, this is the brother Malachi from the Great Millstone Nashville Camp. And Lord willing, that this lesson is edifying to the hopeful elect. All right, I just wanted to go into the topic of salvation, the kingdom only being for the nation of Israel, Yashar Allah, right? Which Yashar Allah is the Lashon Kodash, that ancient Paleo-Hebrew of Israel. The word, the name Israel, which means he is a prince of the power, or he's a prince of God. All right, now, all nations will be in the kingdom, because the kingdom will be here on earth, like it says in the Lord's Prayer, let thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. All right, but then also it talks about New Jerusalem coming down from heaven, onto the earth, which represents the elect and their new bodies coming down from the chariots, to establish the government of the kingdom of heaven under the rule of Yahushua HaMashiach. All right, now, the other nations, though, as you've heard us go into time and time again, the other 17 nations, because there's 18 total, the other 17 will be going into slavery for 1,000 years. After that 1,000-year period, they'll go back to their lands and they'll be tributaries, except one nation, which is the nation of Edom, collectively known as the so-called white man, the Caucasians. All right, they will be destroyed utterly. Thus saith the Bible. The book of Obadiah goes into that. Okay, so I just wanted to get a few scriptures on, just some scriptures showing it's only for Israel. Now, there's a lot of them. All right, but I just got a few that came to my mind. This first one I got from the brother in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and start with this, bring this out, and then I got a couple more, and Lord willing, is edifying. All right, so this is John chapter 11, start of verse 50. It says, "Nor consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not. And this spake he not of himself, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Yahushua should die for that nation. And not for that nation only, but that also he should gather together in one the children of God that were scattered abroad." So the children of God that were scattered abroad. Now watch this. Because you got to remember too, like it goes into in Ezekiel the 37th chapter, Israel became two kingdoms, right? It became basically two nations, right? You had the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. All right, and then every individual tribe, is basically a nation within itself. Not necessarily literally, because we know Israel is one nation, southern, northern kingdom is one, but they were divided, right? They were divided. You had 3 tribes stay in the land. You had 9 tribes go over to the western hemisphere. So those are the circumstances, which then you had the Hellenized Israelites as well, that started following, regardless of what tribe they were from, they started following heathen customs. So the people of the circumcision, the Jakes of the circumcision, they didn't look at them as the same people no more. So how much more the northern kingdom? At that point, they're like, well, shit, that's a whole nother nation. They went way over there. They ain't got nothing to do with us no more. The circumcision has essentially set themselves in a completely different category from the rest of the nation of Israel. All right, and that scripture was just telling us that the Israelites are scattered abroad, and that applies to this day, which also, supports the idea, the fact, rather, that Israelites will look like other nations because we have been scattered and we have been mingling among them. Okay? So this is James chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "James, a servant of God and of the Lord Yahushua HaMashiach, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, greeting." All right, so to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. Once again, just solidifying that point. The Israelites were scattered. See? But we know that the word, Yahushua, it all started with the circumcision. Okay, so, which, matter of fact, let me get this real quick as well. It's Baruch chapter 4, verse 37 in the KJV. It says, "Lo, thy sons come whom thou sentest away. They come gathered together from the east to the west by the word of the Holy One, rejoicing in the glory of God." All right, so rejoicing in the glory of God. You see? So that's how the Israelites, starting with the elect, are going to be gathered across from the 4 corners of the earth. First and foremost by the word, right? Which, mainly goes out through the internet, right? The internet, like the apostles always say, the internet does the heavy lifting, right? But then we know physically, the elect are going to be physically gathered via the chariots, all right, so-called UFOs. All right, and this is all in the Bible. All right, believe it or not. Ripley's believe it or not. Whether you believe it or not, that's on you. All right, Romans 3, for what if some did not believe? All right, this is all contained in the scriptures. Now, I'm going to bring this out, which first of all, Romans 9:4, that's a big cut on salvations for everybody. No, that's not what it said. Let's actually get that real quick. So I'm just going to get a couple heavy hitters and we're going to close this out. Because there ain't no point in, bringing out a million scriptures. Now, of course, you're going to hear a bunch of different scriptures watching different brothers' videos on the same topic. But I'm saying, could we sit here and bring out scriptures for 45 minutes, an hour, going into how it's only for Israel? Yeah, but it's not necessary, right? Because if you already read a handful of them clearly showing you that it's only Israel, then the Bible doesn't contradict itself. So we don't need to sit here for an hour and bring out a million precepts. Because if it says it's only for Israel 5 times, then what do you expect? You expect to just randomly come across one in the book of Joel or something that's going to talk about Esau being saved? Like, it's not a thing. Okay? The Bible does not contradict itself. Romans chapter 9, verse 4, it says, who are Israelites, to whom pertaineth the adoption and the glory and the covenants. All right, another word for covenant is testament. All right, like how we have the Old and New Testament. The covenants, the Old and the New Covenant, which we're not in the New Covenant yet, all right, we're in the transition period, but both of these covenants, both of these testaments are only for the nation of Israel. All right, and it says, and the giving of the law, what's that? The law of life. So the Lord don't care about these other nations if he didn't give them the laws. And the service of God and the promises. Boom. So what do you, where's the misconception coming in at? Look at this. Revelation chapter 21, verse 12. This is in the future, right? This is the kingdom of heaven. And had a wall great and high and had 12 gates. Not 18 gates, right? And at the gates 12 angels and names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. So there's only 12 gates, which is each of the 12 tribes. So where do the other nations come in? They don't. Okay? They don't. Point blank, period. Acts chapter 26, verse 6 to 7. It says, and now I stand, and this is Apostle Paul. And, a lot of Christians, they always go to Apostle Paul, but if they really understood his writings, they wouldn't like him. Right, because he never teach that salvation was for everybody. Okay, he was the apostle that was set to go to the Gentiles, but those are Israelites that followed heathen customs. All right, verse 6, it says, and now I stand and am judged for the hope of the promise made of God unto our fathers, unto which promise are 12 tribes, instantly serving God day and night, hope to come, for which hope's sake, King Agrippa, I am accused of the Jews. Now, people try to bring this out too, because he tried to convert King Agrippa and he was an Edomite. Well, first of all, it's called using your mouth, to get you out of a situation. Like how the scriptures talk about in the book of Sirach, how if you spit upon a spark, put it out. All right, a soft word turneth away wrath. He was seeking help because there were people looking to take his life. All right, so he was just using his tongue. He was using righteous guile, right? Righteous guile is what Apostle put. He wasn't literally saying, yeah, you could, it was all a game. He just did that to play on his mind, to play on his heart, to get him to, okay, yeah, let's protect him, Same thing with that we do, we do the same thing, okay? You gotta use wisdom. It's called using wisdom, right? Using circumspection, being discreet. These are the things that we got to do. You got to move with wisdom. All right, but he said 12 tribes. The promise are 12 tribes. So what else? What else do you need to see? All right, 2nd Ezra chapter 6, verse 58. It says, but we thy people, whom thou hast called thy firstborn, thy only begotten, and thy fervent lover are given into their hands. And this is the prophet Ezra talking about how, we're subject unto these heathens, and how, even though the earth was created for us, we don't have an inheritance of it. All right, but it says thine only begotten and thy fervent lover. The Lord ain't dealing with these other nations. He gave his statutes and his judgments onto Israel. Let's go ahead and grab that. Psalms chapter 147, verse 19 to 20. He sheweth his word unto Jacob, his statutes and his judgments unto Israel. He hath not dealt so with any nation, and as for his judgments, they have not known them. Praise ye the Lord. So he had not dealt so with any other nation. What more do we have to bring out at this point, right? It should almost be common sense, and that's because the scriptures were scattered abroad basically for any and everybody, to get their hands on and to read. So now everybody thinks they're included. This was a private message only to the Israelites. Only the Israelites have business holding the Bible and reading the Bible. And only the elect have, which Yahweh is that we're part of the elect, only the elect have, basically a reason to actually go into it, because they're the only ones that were given the understanding, right? Most of our people don't have the understanding, Romans 11 and 7. Which is why it's baffling when Jake wants to try to talk about salvation for everybody, but we don't even deserve it as the Lord's people. So why don't we be grateful, repent, and stop trying to include these heathens in our shit? You got to be in the Ezra 4:1 spirit, when the chief father said, you have nothing to do with us to worship our God. All right? So that's just something I want to put up real quick. And, Lord willing, it was edifying and straight to the point. Before I close, I want to give all praises to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rachak Wadash. The honors go out to the apostles, Elder Gray Millstone. Shalom.